The darkness behind the smile. A Japanese horror story. Xiaoyan no Linoen. 5 Nights in Tokyo. They say the worst danger never announces itself. It doesn't look dangerous. It doesn't feel dangerous. It smiles at you across a restaurant table and asks what you're drinking and makes you feel for a few hours like maybe tonight is going to be the beginning of something good. These are 5 stories from Tokyo. All of them are true. None of them ended the way anyone expected. Story 1. The night Little Havana became a war zone. Yuki was 21 and had lived in Tokyo her whole life, but had never quite gotten used to it. The noise, the crowds, the sense that the city was always running slightly faster than she could keep up with. She had met Kenji at a friend's house party 3 weeks earlier. He worked at a record shop in Shimokitazawa, the kind that smelled of old vinyl and cigarettes, and had handwritten recommendation cards tucked into every section. He was shy in the specific way that certain kinds of kind people are shy. Not insecure, just careful. He had a nice smile, and he'd asked her twice to confirm the restaurant reservation because he didn't want to get the time wrong. The restaurant was a small Cuban-style place in Shinjuku. One of those spots that shouldn't exist in Tokyo but does. The kind of place that serves black beans and plantains and plays music that makes you feel like you're somewhere else entirely. Colorful tiles on the walls, old photographs of Havana. The smell of coffee and slow-cooked pork drifting from the kitchen. Yuki had been nervous on the train over, fidgeted with her bracelet the whole way, checked her reflection in the dark window twice and told herself to stop. But by the time the food came, she was relaxed. Kenji was telling her about a vinyl he'd found that week, something obscure and Japanese from the 1970s. And even though she didn't know much about music, she found herself genuinely interested in the way he talked about it, the enthusiasm underneath the shyness. She glanced out the window at the Shinjuku street below, the city doing what the city does. Cars and pedestrians and neon and the continuous low roar of millions of people living their lives simultaneously. She thought, this is actually nice. Then the window exploded. Not broke, exploded. The glass gone in an instant, replaced by cold air and screaming and a sound she had heard in enough movies to recognize but had never understood until now. Gunshots. Multiple, rapid, close. She was under the table before she decided to move. Her palms were on broken glass. She couldn't feel it. Her body had made decisions on her behalf, and she was simply along for it. Kenji was beside her, his face completely white, his hand finding hers in the dark under the table. The sound continued for what felt like a very long time and was probably 30 seconds. Then it stopped. The silence afterward was the worst sound she had ever heard. Not true silence, but the silence of people who have been screaming and are now catching their breath before screaming again. Glass everywhere. Food spilled across the floor. An older woman 3 tables over pressing a cloth napkin to her arm. Yuki looked at the napkin and the blood seeping through it and felt suddenly and completely clear-headed in the way that extreme fear sometimes produces. Not calm, but sharp. Nobody is dead, she thought. We are not dead. Kenji squeezed her hand. They stayed under the table until the police came. Later, in the street outside, a police officer told them what had happened. A dispute. Gang-related, political, the details were unclear and probably would remain so. The restaurant had been targeted as a statement. Nobody had intended to kill anyone. Nobody had intended to kill anyone. Yuki turned this over in her mind on the train home and couldn't make it mean anything useful. Kenji had held her hand in the back of the police car when they gave their statements. She had let him. It had felt less like romance and more like 2 people who had been through something together and were not ready to stop touching the evidence that they were both still here. They went out again, a week later. The conversation was different. The ease of the first date was gone, replaced by something more careful, more aware of itself. They had shared something too large too soon, and neither of them knew what to do with it. They stopped seeing each other after the 3rd date. Not badly. Just quietly, by mutual unspoken agreement. She still thinks about him sometimes. She hopes he is well. Story 2. Grand Theft Auto in Harajuku. Saki had matched with Ren on an app and had known within the first 20 minutes of their date that she was not interested but had stayed anyway because the food was good and she didn't want to be rude. Ren had spent the dinner talking about his car, not in the way that people talk about things they love, with specific knowledge and genuine feeling, but in the way that people talk about things they want you to be impressed by. The car was modified. The car was fast. The car had a sound system that could be heard from 3 blocks away. He had won a street race last month, or almost won. The details shifted slightly between tellings. He drove her home in the car, which was indeed loud and did indeed have a significant sound system and did indeed have the low suspension modification that made every speed bump feel like a small car accident. She was thinking about how to say goodbye and exit gracefully when he turned onto a street she didn't recognize. "I want to show you something," he said. The street was long and straight and quiet. One of those stretches of Tokyo Road that exist between neighborhoods, connecting places without quite being in either of them. He pressed the accelerator. The speed climbed faster than she expected. She gripped the door handle without meaning to. She told herself she was being anxious about nothing. Then the lights appeared in the mirror. 2 police cars. 3. Their lights throwing blue and red across the buildings on either side, their sirens starting low and building. Ren's expression changed, not to fear exactly, to something more like calculation, the expression of someone weighing options. He pressed the accelerator harder. "Stop," Saki said. "Stop the car." He didn't stop. The city blurred past. She couldn't see anything outside the windows except streaks of light. She was pressed into the seat. She could not move her body in any meaningful way. She thought of her mother. She thought of the specific and terrible stupidity of dying in a stranger's car because she had been too polite to take a taxi home. The police executed a maneuver she had seen in television documentaries. A vehicle contact that sent the car skidding sideways across the road, tires screaming, her head hitting the window, the world tilting. The car stopped. The windows came in. She covered her face. She was already screaming when the door opened and hands reached in, firm, not rough, and guided her out. The road was cold under her feet. She had lost a shoe at some point. She stood on the road with her hands raised and looked at the police cars arranged in a semicircle and at Ren being restrained on the ground, still talking about his rights, and felt something close to wonder that she was standing here, upright, breathing, with only a small cut on her forehead from the window. They separated her from Ren immediately, and an officer drove her home 2 hours later. She deleted his number before she got back in her apartment. She deleted the app too. She reinstalled it 3 months later. She told herself she would be more careful. She was. Story 3. The scenic route to nowhere. Haruka had gone on the date with Takashi because a friend had described him as successful and well-mannered, and Haruka was 32 and tired of unambitious men. He was both of those things, technically. He arrived in a car that cost more than Haruka made in a year, wearing a suit that cost more than the car's monthly payment, with the particular confidence of someone who has always been able to buy their way out of every problem they've encountered. The restaurant was too formal for her taste. The food was extraordinary. The conversation was the conversation of a man who answers questions about himself without asking any in return, who listens to your answers only to decide whether they confirm what he already believes about the kind of person you are. He ordered for her without asking what she wanted. She watched him treat the waiter with the cold efficiency of someone who views service staff as infrastructure rather than people, and something inside her settled into a quiet and definitive no. She had come by train. Her car was at the mechanic. When he offered to drive her home, she calculated the cost of a taxi against the awkwardness of declining and made the wrong choice. The first 15 minutes were fine. Then she noticed the road, not her neighborhood, not anywhere close. The city thinning out, the buildings getting lower, the lights getting fewer, the roads getting narrower. Where are we going? He smiled. Scenic route. Her phone was in her bag. She thought about taking it out and decided not to do anything that might change the temperature of the car. The countryside opened up around them. Fields, a barn, nothing that could hear her if she screamed. She asked again to go home, more firmly. He heard the firmness, and something in him responded to it. Not by complying, but by becoming very still, the stillness of someone deciding something. He told her he'd figured her out. He said she had used him for a nice dinner, that she had wasted his time, that he was a man whose time was worth a great deal and she had taken it under false pretenses. She tried to explain that she simply hadn't felt a connection, that this was normal, that these things happened and nobody was at fault. He looked at her for a moment in a way that made her understand something about the space between them, that she was in a car in the countryside with no phone signal and no landmarks she recognized, and that whatever he decided to do next, the decision was entirely his. He said what he said. I could drive you further and do whatever I wanted and nobody would find you for days. She became very still. She did not respond. She thought about the precise physics of the situation, the door handle, the moving car, the darkness outside, the distance to anything, and understood that her options were limited to things that would make the situation worse, and one thing that might not. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't meant to upset him. She said whatever she thought he needed to hear. The car turned around eventually. He drove her home in silence. Before she could get out, he grabbed her arm and told her she should remember what he could have done. She got out. She walked to her building. She locked the door. She reported it the next morning. The police spoke to him. He told a story that made her sound dramatic and confused. He was wealthy and charming when he chose to be, and good at spinning stories. They gave him a warning. She checked her locks for a long time after that. She still does sometimes. Story 4. The past never lets you go. Miku had wanted this date to be different. Her history with men was a specific and repeating pattern that she was aware of and had not yet managed to escape. Drawn to people who carried danger the way some people carry cologne, as though it were a natural part of who they were. Hiroshi seemed different. His profile mentioned hiking. He had a steady job. When they texted, he asked about her opinions and seemed interested in the answers. She had told him a little about her past. Not everything, but enough to suggest she was trying to leave a particular kind of life behind. He listened. He didn't judge. She suggested a quiet bar on the outer edge of her neighborhood, far enough from her usual area that she was unlikely to see anyone she knew. She arrived first and took a table near the back. He was on time. He looked like his pictures. He was easy to talk to. An hour in, he excused himself to use the bathroom. When he came back, he was subtly different. Still present, still engaged, but with a new quality of watchfulness that she noticed without being able to explain. They finished their drinks, and Hiroshi offered to drive her home. She accepted. She noticed the group in the parking lot before he did. 3 men, maybe 4, at the far edge of the lot. She recognized one of them, someone connected to a person she had known 2 years ago, during a period of her life she had been systematically dismantling since. She had not expected to see anyone from that world here, at this quiet bar on the outer edge of a different neighborhood. She told Hiroshi they should hurry. He took her arm, and they walked faster. They didn't make it to the car. The group moved to intercept them. They wanted to know who Hiroshi was, why he was with her. One of them had a weapon, not a gun, something blunt and heavy, and the sound it made against Hiroshi's car door said something clear about intent. Hiroshi pulled her toward the car. She was trying to unlock it. Her hands were shaking. Things were hitting the car. People were shouting. They got in. He drove fast and the group did not follow. She apologized the whole way home. He said it wasn't her fault. He walked her to her door and said he'd text tomorrow. He didn't text tomorrow. She waited 3 days and tried again. Nothing. She found she had been unmatched on the app. She sat on her couch and felt the particular grief of having tried to leave something behind and having it follow her anyway, publicly, in front of someone she had been hopeful about. She told herself she would be more careful about where she went. She knew that wasn't really the problem. Story 5. What the gut knows. Emmy was 22 and had not been on many dates but had liked Takaru from the first time he came into the coffee shop where she worked. He ordered the same thing every time. He remembered her name after the second visit. When he finally asked her out, she said yes before she finished processing the question. Dinner was good. A small Italian place. Low lights, good pasta, easy conversation. They talked for 2 hours, and she felt the specific relief of being with someone she didn't have to perform for. Afterward, they went to a club in Shibuya. She loved dancing. He was not a natural dancer, but he was good-natured about it, and they laughed a lot and spent too much money on overpriced drinks, and she thought, this is exactly what a good night feels like. At some point, she couldn't remember exactly when, a man appeared. Older, maybe late 30s, with slicked back hair and a smile that was technically perfect. He introduced himself and mentioned he was throwing an after-party, invited them along, and before Emmy quite understood what had happened, there were 8 people piling into taxis heading to a house in Shibuya. The house was extraordinary. Too extraordinary in retrospect. A modern 2-story building with a bar stocked as though for a hotel lobby and a hot tub in the garden that was already occupied when they arrived. The man, everyone called him by a nickname, was the perfect host. Always moving, always making sure glasses were full, always laughing at exactly the right moment. The party had energy that felt slightly manufactured, like a performance of a party rather than one that had simply happened. Takeru stayed close to Emmy but was quieter than he'd been at the club. She noticed him watching the host across the room with a quality of attention that was different from casual observation. At 2 a.m., he said they should go. She was surprised. The party was still going. She was still having fun. She said so. He was firm in a way he hadn't been before. He said he was tired. He said he wanted to leave. She was annoyed. She said so less directly than she meant to. They left. The taxi home was quiet. He seemed distracted. She assumed he was just tired. Her phone rang at 9 the next morning. A number she didn't know. Police. They wanted to know if she had been at a house party the previous night. She sat down. They asked about the host. They asked what she had observed. They told her, eventually, carefully, that a young woman at the party had been assaulted after most guests had left, that the host was in custody. That evidence on his computer suggested this was not the first time he had used these parties for this purpose. Emmy sat on the edge of her bed for a long time after the call ended. She thought about the hot tub, about the drinks that were always appearing, about the quality of attention the host had directed at the younger women at the party. She texted Takaru. He came over that afternoon. She told him what the police had said. He went pale. She asked him why he had wanted to leave. He said he hadn't been able to articulate it at the time. Something about the way the host moved through the room, always finding reasons to be near the women who were drinking most. Something about the offers of more drinks, always another drink, always making sure no glass was empty. Something about the quality of his attention that was different from a generous host's attention. He had felt, he said, that something was wrong. He didn't know what. He just knew he wanted her away from it. She hugged him for a long time. 5 nights in Tokyo. 5 women who went out hoping for something ordinary and found something else. The lesson is the same in all 5 stories, though none of them learned it easily. Pay attention to the people who trust their instincts. Pay attention to the feeling that something is wrong before you can explain why. And pay attention to the exits, because the worst danger never announces itself. It just smiles at you across the table and asks what you're drinking.